Have you ever had a powerful spiritual experience and you're just on top of the world and you're like, I'm gonna be so spiritual, powerful forever. But then life hits you hard. When was it that God spoke to Elijah in a still small voice? It was when he was in the depths of discouragement. Sometimes we might feel like we're completely alone. We think, I quit, there's no hope. But things are not as bad as they look. So often the things we're worried about don't even take place. It's probably not gonna happen. But if it does, Jesus will be enough. So today we're going to do a crash course on 80 years of Israelite history. We're going to talk about some of the greatest stories in the Old Testament, some of which are really well known and others of which you probably never heard of. We've seen the time period of the United Kingdom with Saul, David, and Solomon, who were kings over all the 12 tribes. And today we're going to see the story of how the kingdom was divided. So Solomon has died and his son Rehoboam is about to take the throne, but there's a problem. Solomon did a lot of great things, but he also raised taxes. And so the people are getting tired of it. As Rehoboam is about to take over the throne, the people come to Rehoboam and say, your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you. Rehoboam responds, go away for 3 days, then come back to me. Rehoboam starts consulting with other people to see what he should do. He asks the elders, the old, the wise people, and they say, if you will be a servant to these people and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants. Then Rehoboam turned to the young men, the people he grew up with. He said, what's your advice? They replied, tell the people, my father laid on you a heavy yoke, I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips, I will scourge you with scorpions. Now, which advice do you think is better? It's obvious, but Rehoboam decides to listen to his young friends and he tells the people, I'm going to scourge you with scorpions. Well, predictably, the people revolted and 10 of the tribes secede. They formed their own kingdom, which is called Israel. And this can be confusing because often when we use the word Israel, we're referring to the 12 tribes. But for the rest of the book of 1st and 2nd Kings, what we're going to be seeing is Israel is its own entity. It's a kingdom in the north, and the first king of Israel is going to be Jeroboam. That's the 10 tribes are comprising the kingdom of Israel. And then it's the tribes of Judah and Benjamin in the south. Rehoboam will become their king, the first king of Judah as its own separate kingdom. Does that make sense? So from here on out, this is a landmark event in Israelite history. Now there's a divided kingdom. And I know it's a little confusing that you got Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Why do they have to have such similar names? I don't know, but you can remember that Rehoboam with an R is keeping the royal throne of David down in Judah. Jeroboam is going to be king in the north. Now let's just pause for a moment and consider a lesson from this story. Rehoboam did not value the counsel of the older, wiser people, and it hurt him. So yes, there is great value in youth and energy. I'm not saying we should discount the young, but there's a temptation, I think, especially when we're young, to devalue the wisdom that comes with age. Rehoboam learned that lesson at a great price. So now the kingdom has split, and from this point on, the anonymous narrator of the book of Kings is going to jump back and forth between the two kingdoms. So he'll tell us the story of one king until that king dies, and then he'll go back in time to where that story had picked up in the other kingdom, tell the story of what's been going on during that same time frame in the southern kingdom, and then he'll bounce back to the northern and kind of flip back and forth. And the pattern is going to repeat until we get to 2 Kings 17 when Israel is destroyed. But we'll talk about that in a future class. So the first king that we hear a lot about is Jeroboam, the first king of Israel. Let's look at the story of Jeroboam the prophet and the lion. Now we want to start at the beginning of Jeroboam's story. Back in 1 Kings chapter 11, there was a prophet named Ahijah, and he met Jeroboam wearing a new cloak. The two of them were alone out in the country, and Ahijah took hold of the new cloak he was wearing and tore it into 12 pieces. Then he said to Jeroboam, take 10 pieces for yourself, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. See, I am going to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand and give you 10 tribes. But for the sake of my servant David and the city of Jerusalem, he will have 1 tribe. I will do this because they have forsaken me. As for you, you will be king over Israel. If you do whatever I command you and walk in obedience to me, I will be with you. I will build you a dynasty as enduring as the one I built for David, and I will give Israel to you. So it's not just that Jeroboam is a rebel against higher taxes. He's called by God. He's promised a kingdom and a legacy that will endure forever if he follows God. But Jeroboam is afraid. Jeroboam, the king of Israel in the north, he's worried that the people are going to keep going down to Jerusalem to offer sacrifices. And if they keep going down to Jerusalem, eventually his people will just funnel back to Judah. So he creates altars and golden calves in the northern town, Dan, and the southern town, Bethel, of his kingdom. His goal is to make sure that the people won't go back to Jerusalem. Can you see how this is a lack of faith? God said, as long as you follow me, you'll have a kingdom that will always endure. But he's like, oh, I don't know. I don't know if that will really work. So I'll do my own strategy. I'll build some idols. Jeroboam told the people, it's too much for you to go to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. Just worship a little bit closer to home at Dan or Bethel. Now, one day there's a man of God, and he's called to go rebuke Jeroboam. He travels from Judah to Bethel, and the scriptures don't tell us what the name of this person is. He's just called the man of God. But a later Jewish tradition tells us that his name was Jadon. So just to keep things straight, I'm going to refer to him as Jadon as we're talking about him, okay? So Jadon shouts a prophecy against the altar. He says, this is the sign the Lord has declared. The altar will be split apart and the ashes on it will be poured out. Jeroboam is there and he does not like Jadon criticizing him. So he stretches out his hand and he says, seize him. But the moment he does, his hand freezes and he can't move his arm. And then the altar cracks open just like Jadon said it would. So Jeroboam says to Jadon, please pray for me. Jadon prays for him and then Jeroboam's arm is healed. So what would you do at this point if you were Jeroboam? I think it's kind of funny. Jeroboam invites Jadon over to his house for dinner. It's a good comeback. But then Jadon refuses to go to dinner. He says, even if you were to give me half your possessions, I would not go with you, nor would I eat bread, nor drink water here. For I was commanded by the Lord, you must not eat bread or drink water or return by the way you came. So Jadon has very strict instructions. Go in, give the prophecy, and then go a different way, straight home. No eating, no drinking. So Jadon starts heading back from Bethel to Judah. It's only about a 10-mile walk. But on the way, Jadon meets an old prophet. And the prophet invites him to come to his home for dinner. So Jadon repeats the warning, no, I'm supposed to go straight home. But then something very strange happens. This second prophet says, I too am a prophet, as you are. And an angel said to me by the word of the Lord, bring him back with you to your house so that he may eat bread and drink water. But he was lying to him. Now, in a moment, we'll look at the Joseph Smith translation, but if we just take the text that we have here in 1 Kings, it's a very strange story. Why is this prophet lying to Jadon? And we obviously don't know all the details. The story is almost 3,000 years old. I'm sure there's lots of things we're missing. But the way the Bible frames it, one prophet is trying to trick another prophet. Now, the Joseph Smith translation gives us some additional insight. It says that the Lord had told this second prophet to try to prove or test Jadon to see if Jadon would be willing to do what God had told him to do. Unfortunately, Jadon does not pass the test. He goes to the prophet's house and he's eating dinner, and then right in the middle of dinner, the second prophet says to Jadon, you have defied the word of the Lord. You came back and ate bread and drank water in the place where he told you not to eat or drink. Therefore, your body will not be buried in the tomb of your ancestors. I think this would be a very awkward moment at the dinner table, right? I don't know if you've ever been at a dinner table and your host is like, you have defied the word of the Lord. You're like, okay, well, I guess I'll be wrapping up. So Jadon heads out with his donkey, and on the road, a lion kills Jadon. But it's a very curious thing. The lion does not eat Jadon. The lion doesn't attack the donkey. It's just the donkey and the lion are standing guard over Jadon's body. It was clearly showing that God had judged Jadon for his disobedience. So the prophet who had tested Jadon, he comes, he sees what's happened, he feels so sad, and he buries Jadon in his own grave. The end. It is a very strange story. It's one of the lesser known stories, I think, in the Old Testament. But this is one of the things I love about reading the Old Testament. There are so many of these unique stories. And I used to have a neighbor who was a gospel doctrine teacher, and he would tell us that one of God's favorite teaching methods is to teach through stories. He would say, God will tell you a story with characters who choose, and the choices of these characters have consequences. And then we can integrate those characters, choices, and consequences into our own lives. So what do you think? What can we learn from the story of Jeroboam, Jadon, the altar, and the lion?
I think for me, the challenge would be knowing that it is the Lord specifically giving you that direction. And if you knew that, then you follow with exactness and honor.
So in this case, it's showing sometimes it's hard. And today it's very challenging. We live in a world where there's lots of voices telling us, oh, this is the right thing, this is the right thing. And am I really able to dial in and hear this is the true voice of the Lord and not deviate from it? Now, that's a challenge we face.
What I got from the story is to obey with exactness the command of the Lord. Sometimes it's difficult to see the consequences of our actions, but we tend to see that the hand of the Lord is there, and if we obey him, he blesses us, but then we see the consequences is if we do not follow him, that we will be punished.
Thank you.
Jadon obeyed when Jeroboam invited him to eat with him. He said no. And by the time he got further away, he was probably really hungry and thirsty by this time. It's like it was the same temptation again. And I think sometimes we can avoid a temptation and think we are so good now. But Satan can come again at you, sometimes when you're even a little weaker. And we have to be always aware and on our toes about temptations. And just because one time we've avoided it doesn't mean it's not going to come to us again.
Thank you. In some ways, I think it's interesting that both Jadon and Jeroboam, they struggle with the same problem. God tells them something, and they feel it, and they try to act on it, but at one point, they sort of lose their trust in what they had felt God tell them to do. And that's a challenge that we face as well. Now, the next story we're going to talk about is more well-known. It's the story of the widow at Zarephath. So let's get some context for this story. Over the next couple of chapters in Kings, the storyline is bouncing back and forth between the southern and northern kingdoms. And by the time we get to 1 Kings 17, the king of Israel is Ahab. Here's how the scriptures describe him. Ahab did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. He not only considered it trivial to commit the sins of Jeroboam, but he also married Jezebel. So the baddest of the bad boys marries the baddest of the bad girls. They become a very bad couple. We read, Ahab set up an altar for Baal in the temple of Baal that he built in Samaria. Ahab did more to arouse the anger of the Lord than did all the kings of Israel before him. So Baal was the Canaanite god of storms, and many of the people believed that he was the one who would provide thunder, he would provide the rain and the storms. So God called a prophet named Elijah, who went to Ahab and said, as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years, except by my word. Now, can you see how this is a direct challenge to Baal? It's like Elijah saying, okay, sure, your God is in charge of the storms, but my God is in charge of turning the faucet on, right? Like you have nothing compared to what the true God of Israel has. After Elijah makes this proclamation, God tells him to hide out near a brook, and it's miraculous. Ravens will come and feed him food. There's a famine in the land because, just like Elijah had foretold, there's a huge drought. But eventually the brook dries up because of the drought, and so the Lord tells Elijah it's time for him to move. God says, go at once to Zarephath in the region of Zidon and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food. Now for us, we probably think, okay, great, yeah, no problem, just go to Zarephath, wherever that is. And we have no idea, is this like a 1-mile journey, a 5-mile journey? It's actually an 80-mile journey. Now think about how crazy Elijah's life has been. He's been hiding by a brook, getting fed by ravens. That's pretty strange. And now God tells him, travel several days through dangerous territory, and I want you to go to the very region where Jezebel came from, the heart of Baal worship. It's a reminder that sometimes God tells us to do things that don't really make sense. But Elijah follows God's commands, and when he arrives in Zarephath, he meets a woman who's gathering some sticks. Elijah says to her, would you bring me a little water in a jar so I may have a drink? And bring me, please, a piece of bread. The woman said, I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I am gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son so that we may eat it and die. Elijah said, don't be afraid. Go home and do just as you have said, but first make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me, and then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel says, the jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land. Now remember, this woman is probably not a worshiper of Jehovah. She's living in Baal country. Is she going to trust what Elijah is saying? She does. She acts in faith, and from that point on, there is food every day for Elijah and the woman and her family. So again, we see that there's a story with characters who choose, and the choices of the characters have consequences. And now we get to integrate those characters, choices, and consequences into our own lives. So what do you think? What's a lesson that touches your heart from the story of Elijah and the widow of Zarephath? One of the things that stands out to me about this miracle is that God didn't just give an overflowing abundance of flour and oil. It just says that a little bit came each day. It never ran out. It reminds me of the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread. Sometimes the Lord is just giving us enough for one day at a time. Well, Elijah's there for a while. By the time we get to this point, more than 2 years have passed since Elijah said there's going to be a famine, a drought in the land. And that takes us to maybe the most famous story we'll talk about today, Elijah and the priests of Baal. So God tells Elijah to go and confront Ahab, who's that wicked king of Israel. When they meet, I think it's kind of funny what Ahab says. Is that you troubler of Israel? So Ahab calls Elijah a troubler of Israel because Elijah's the one who had prophesied the drought. But Elijah responds, I have not made trouble for Israel, but you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals. So Elijah arranges for this great showdown on Mount Carmel. You can still go to Mount Carmel today where this happens. All the people gather together. Ahab's there. And then you've got the priests of Baal and Elijah. And Elijah says to the people who are there, how long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. Elijah's telling the people that they have to make a choice. They're trying to follow both Baal and God. They're hedging their bets. Maybe Jehovah's real, maybe Baal's real. Let's just worship both and probably things will work out. And Elijah's saying, no, you have to make a choice. No one can serve two masters. If Baal is real, then Jehovah is not. If Jehovah is real, then Baal is not. This isn't just an ancient dilemma, it's something that's at the core of each of our lives. A few years ago, Professor Kerry Muhlestein gave a BYU devotional that has really resonated with me. He said, we know ancient Israel was worshiping both the true God and false gods at the same time. Our task is not to ask ourselves if, but instead how we do the same thing. There is no doubt that we all worship more than one God. For some of us, instead of worshiping both Jehovah and Baal, we worship Jehovah and football. For others, it is video games, material possessions, or a whole host of other things. I have become convinced that on the whole, we struggle with one kind of false god more than any other. We tend to worship the ideas of the world, and we don't even realize we're doing it. The problem is that the world has been shouting its ideas at us loudly and incessantly from the time we were very small. We encounter these ideas in our schools from kindergarten through college. We are inundated with them as we read newspapers, watch TV, movies, or listen to the radio, and in 100 other ways. Many of the concepts we encounter are harmless enough, but most of the time, we are not very careful in sifting through the ideas we hear. And I am certain we have all swallowed a lot of fallacious and dangerous ideas, even without realizing it. Most of us don't wake up in the morning and say, yeah, I want to worship some false idols today. But maybe there's ideas that start creeping in, like loving people is more important than loving God. Or maybe my value, my worth as a person is based on what I'm able to accomplish or how successful I am. And those ideas might not sound dangerous at first, but over time, they pull us away from God. And Elijah is saying, sooner or later, you have to make a choice. In other words, how long will you waver between two opinions? Now in English, in the King James, the phrase is, how long will you halt between two opinions? I think that can be a little confusing because in English, when we think of the word halt, it's most likely to mean stop. But there's an earlier meaning for halt, which is to limp along. That's what the King James translators meant. So the visual that Elijah's trying to give to the people is you're limping, you're kind of flittering back and forth between these two opinions, and now it's time for you to make a choice. You have to decide, who am I going to follow? Is it Jehovah or is it Baal? And you cannot have both. So I have some questions that I'd like us to reflect on. What do you think might be ways that people waver between two opinions today? Why do you think people waver? And maybe think about your own life. In what ways are you wavering between two opinions, trusting God while also relying on something else.
Sometimes we will say things like, well, I don't want to offend them, so I'm going to just be nice and accept what they say and go along with it. You know, we're less worried about offending God by following what some other people might think is more important. So I feel like we waver between supporting maybe family or friends or just the general public versus standing up for what we know is right and trusting in what the Lord has taught us.
Thank you. Great example.
I'm finding in my own family, my children have a hard time keeping the Sabbath day holy. They waver between what the world does and what they know they should do. They very much justify. I go to church and I stop by the store and pick up what I need for dinner later. I have found that all I can do is be a good example. And one son said to me the other day, I'll go to the store. I know you won't on Sunday, but I'll go pick that up, Mom. No, don't do that for me. But I find wavering between the ways of the world and the ways of our Father in heaven.
Thank you. So I think you remember the story of what happens next. Elijah sets up a contest. The people bring 2 bulls, and Baal's prophets get to choose which bull they want, and the goal is Baal's prophets and Elijah, they're going to cut up the bull, and we're going to see which bull God will light on fire. The people love the idea. They're like, this is great. We're going to clearly see who the true God is. So the contest begins, and the prophets of Baal go first. We read, they called on the name of Baal from morning till noon. Baal, answer us, they shouted. But there was no response. No one answered. About noon, Elijah starts to taunt them. He says, shout louder. Maybe your God is deep in thought or busy or traveling. Maybe he's sleeping and must be awakened. At one level, it's kind of humorous, right? Like, come on, maybe your God's asleep. But at another level, it's painful. It's a symbolic picture of what idolatry really looks like. It's exhausting. I jump around all day trying to find fulfillment in a false foundation, but I don't get anywhere. I'm in a frenzy trying to follow an idol to make myself feel sufficient, but it's never enough. And did you notice another detail? We read the priests of Baal slashed themselves with swords and spears until their blood flowed. I love this insight from Timothy Keller. He said, every other God says, slash yourself for me. There's only one God and only one Lord who was slashed for you. His blood ran. Every other God will make your blood run. There's only one God whose blood ran for you. So hours pass, there's no response from Baal. Finally, the priests of Baal give up, and Elijah starts to prepare his sacrifice. And he really stacks the odds against himself. He tells the people, you can pour all the water you want onto my ox, and the sticks are wet, and there's a trench that he's dug around the ox. It's all filled with water. There's no hope for Elijah. But then he prays out loud, Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, let it be known today that you are the God in Israel. Answer me, Lord, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God. And whew, there's a miracle. Fire comes down from heaven and burns up the sacrifice. It even licks up the water in the trench. It is absolutely incredible. And just after that, there are storm clouds on the horizon. It starts to rain and the drought is over. Think about Elijah. He has got to be on top of the world. I don't know if there's a greatest hits of miracles, but this has got to be one of the all-time greatest miracles. 48 hours later, how do you think Elijah is feeling? Do you think he's like, yeah, that's amazing? Actually, we're about to find he's in deep depression. Why? Because Ahab, that wicked Ahab, he's a whiner as well. And so once this happens, he goes home and he starts whining to Jezebel and says, oh, look at what Elijah did. Well, Jezebel, she's a boss woman, and she's like, oh yeah? She writes a letter to Elijah and says, 24 hours from now, you'll be dead. So Elijah is terrified and he runs to the south. Now, have you ever had a powerful spiritual experience? Maybe it's been at General Conference or maybe FSY or Girls Camp, and you're just on top of the world and you're like, I'm going to be so spiritual, powerful forever. But then life hits you hard. Elijah can relate. In this case, he has this downward spiral that we'll call Elijah's depression. So he's run to the southern part of Judah, far away from Jezebel, and we read him complain to the Lord. He says, I have had enough, Lord. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Feels like my life has no value. Notice the Lord's response. we read an angel touched Elijah and said, "Get up and eat." Elijah looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. So what is God's message for Elijah? Take a nap. And I think this is actually a very valuable message for us. My mother-in-law always will say, fatigue makes cowards of us all. And sometimes when you're down in the depths of discouragement, you need to get some more rest. You need to eat better food, right? We need to follow the advice of King Benjamin, who said, don't run faster than you have strength. Sometimes the spiritual thing to do is to slow down and take care of yourself so that later you'll be able to help others. So after Elijah regains his strength, he goes to the mount known as Horeb or Sinai. It's the same place where God appeared to Moses. And God tells Elijah, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. This next passage is a very famous part of Scripture. I'm sure you're familiar with it. We read, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind rent the mountains, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. Now, this is a familiar passage of Scripture, but what I hope is that you'll remember the context of it. When was it that God spoke to Elijah in a still small voice? It was when he was in the depths of discouragement. Could God have performed a miracle? Could he have spoken to him in the fire or in the earthquake? Yeah, we know he could have because we just saw that miracle. But in Elijah's discouragement, God spoke to him in a still, quiet voice. And sometimes you and I might be really discouraged and we think, God, I need a miracle. Show me a big sign. And God's going to speak to us in a still, small voice. Now, there's another thing that I hope we'll remember about this passage. We often just stop right at that phrase, after the fire, a still, small voice. But what does God say in the still, small voice? He actually asks Elijah a question. He says, what are you doing here, Elijah? And Elijah responds, I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too. Sometimes we might feel like Elijah, like we're completely alone. But in Elijah's case, and sometimes for us as well, his discouragement has distorted his view of reality. Elijah says, I'm the only one left. But what's the reality? God says, I have left me 7,000 in Israel. Elijah is not alone. There's 7,000 people with him. And soon Elijah is going to meet his new best friend, Elisha. In other words, when Elijah is hitting rock bottom, things are not as bad as they look, and they're about to get better. That's how it is with us sometimes. We're in the depths of discouragement. We think, I quit. There's no hope. But things are not as bad as they look. They are better than we think they are. Now, something that's really interesting in this story is what's caused all of this discouragement for Elijah. He's worried that Ahab and Jezebel are going to kill him. But in reality, Elijah's prophecy of the death of Ahab and the death of Jezebel are going to come to pass. Elijah's afraid of Ahab and Jezebel, but he actually has nothing to worry about. In fact, step back and look at it from a different angle. Elijah is worried about death, but in reality, he's going to be one of the few human beings who never die. In a few chapters, a chariot of fire is going to carry Elijah up to heaven. In other words, what he is worried about won't happen. It's just like we saw back with Jacob and Esau. So often the things we're worried about don't even take place. Elijah was literally lifted above his greatest fear, death. I love this insight from Pastor Craig Greschel. He said, the reality is, for many of you, the number one thing that is consuming you right now, your greatest fear, your biggest what if, for many, you will never experience that because God will lift you above it. But for a few of you, what you fear will happen. Jesus said, in this world, you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Even if your greatest what if does come to pass, he will be with you and he will be enough. If we can get this deep into our hearts, that's the path for peace. There's something that you're deeply worried about right now. It's probably not going to happen. But if it does, Jesus will be enough. So now Elijah's been refreshed and he has a new mission from God and he sets out right away to follow it. And the first step is to call a new prophet, someone to succeed him, and that person is going to be Elisha. So as we turn to the story of Elisha's call, I think it's important to note that God specifically told Elijah who to call. It's a reminder that God personally directs the callings of prophets. I have no doubt that God directed President Oaks to call Elder Caussé and Elder Gilbert to the Quorum of the 12. So Elijah goes to call Elisha, and he finds him in a surprising place. He's plowing a field. Now, by the way, I should admit, this is very confusing that there's Elijah and Elisha. My whole life I've been confused by this, and you may have a hard time with these stories as well. My one tip is that in chronological order, they appear alphabetically. So Elijah comes before Elisha. I don't know if that'll be helpful or not, but that's my tip. So here's how we're introduced to Elisha. He was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving the 12th pair. It's only a sentence, but it actually tells us quite a bit about Elisha. First of all, in that time, if you had 1 yoke of oxen, you were doing pretty well. So to have 12 yoke of oxen tells us that Elisha and his family, they're pretty well off. Now the sentence also tells us that Elisha is spending a lot of time day after day doing repetitive work, just walking behind some oxen. It's a reminder of what we saw with the donkeys, right? That sometimes it's in the donkeys that our destiny is found. Sometimes it's in the ordinary, mundane tasks of life that God is going to reach out to us, just like God now reaches out to Elisha. Elijah puts his mantle or cloak around Elisha. It's a way of saying, I'm calling you to follow after me. So Elisha goes up to Elijah and says, hey, I want to follow you, but first, can I go say goodbye to my parents? Elijah says, that's fine. So Elisha goes, says goodbye to his parents, and then notice what Elisha does. We read, Elisha took his yoke of oxen and slaughtered them. He burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. Now, there's more to this story than just a farewell barbecue. There's a story that I heard, I don't know if it's fully true, but it's about Cortez when he comes to conquer the New World. The story is that Cortez had his men burn the ships so that there could be no retreat. So as they move forward, it's either conquer or perish. I'm not sure if that story is true, but I'm sure that Elisha's story is true. He does the same thing, not with ships, but with oxen and with a plow. Can you see? This is a whole new direction. He's saying, there's no way that I'm going back to my former life. I am all in on my new life as a follower of Jehovah. This is actually a pattern that we see in the scriptures. You remember the anti-Nephi Lehites. They didn't just put their weapons up on a shelf. They buried them deep in the earth. There's another story. This one's not quite as well known. In Acts chapter 19, there was a group of people who were involved with witchcraft. And when they decide to follow Jesus Christ, they don't just donate all their books to Goodwill, they burn them. And the value of the books was 50,000 pieces of silver. That's what it means to really surrender. It's not okay, I'll follow God, but I'm going to have an exit plan just in case. It's removing the very thing that's holding you back. So I want us to think for a moment. What would it look like in your life today to burn the plow?
In real life today, an example could be like putting down our phones. There's so many distractions on there, or reducing our screen time and just letting go of distractions that may deter us from doing the will of the Lord.
Thank you.
Years ago, when I was converted, I am a Colombian, so I have a lot of coffee every day. I smoke, I drink, I party. And when I know the gospel, and I decided to change, because one thing is to know the gospel, another thing is when you are converted. When I was converted, I left everything. I never looked back.
So, did you ever burn the coffee? What did you do with the leftover stuff that you had?
I throw away my cigarettes. I know, I remember the last day when I was going to be baptized, I was smoking, and the elders say, "Sister, you smell so much cigarettes." I told him, I don't know if I am going to be able to quit the cigarettes, and I have 2 packages in my purse. And they told me, try the Lord on this. Ask him. And I did. And that day that I was baptized, I take my cigarettes with a lot of pain. I cannot tell you that it was easy. My 2 packages, and I do it like that and put it in the trash. because I was trying many times to quit cigarettes, but I keep it in my purse. So this time I throw it away.
You had to burn the plow.
Yeah, it was not easy.
Powerful. Recently I heard this story and it deeply touched my heart. A pastor said, just last week, I had a very special conversation with a person that I know well who continued to go back to porn. I said, how are you accessing this? He goes, well, my computer's safe, but I keep doing it on my iPhone. I said, what do you want to do about it? And he goes, I've got to get rid of my smartphone. So he got rid of his smartphone and is now using a dumb phone. That's burning the plow. And here's the question that I want you to ponder. He says, and so I would just ask you to ask the Holy Spirit, what plow do you need to burn to fully follow Jesus? Think about that question. It's going to look differently for each one of us, but we probably all have some type of favorite sin, something that we're holding on to that we know my life honestly would be a little bit better. I would be a little more Christ-like if I could just let go of this. Don't put it in your purse. Don't put it on the shelf. Burn the plow. Get rid of it. One day, a man came to Jesus, and it was almost a similar scene as what we saw between Elijah and Elisha. The man said to Jesus, I will follow you, Lord, but first let me go back and say goodbye to my family. Now, when Elisha asked Elijah this question, Elijah said, sure, go back. Do you think that's what Jesus is going to do? He said, sure, I'll wait for you for 15 minutes. Come on back. No, Jesus actually raises the bar. He said, no one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for service in the kingdom of God. That can feel like a big ask. But you see, it's the same story that we've been talking about all day. Jeroboam was afraid to trust God, so he had a backup plan, building idols for the people. Jadon wasn't 100% sure about God's message, so he followed bad advice. Jeroboam, they were trying to waver between two opinions, but Elijah says, you can't do that. Is it Jehovah or is it Baal? You cannot have both. The widow of Zarephath, she shows us what to do. We put God first. Elisha shows us what to do. You burn the yoke. It's easier to be all in on Jesus Christ than it is to waver between two opinions. So picture yourself, you're by the Sea of Galilee, walking along a dusty road, and walking next to you is Jesus Christ. He turns to you and says, follow me. What will you do? Will you have unfinished business that you have to take care of? Or can you confidently look at Jesus Christ and say, I will follow you, knowing that you have already burned the plow?